At long last, the KTM 390 Enduro R has made its way to us, and right away in the test, the big question arises. What is it really? A proper enduro, a stripped down adventure bike, or perhaps a naked bike at its core, made off-road capable as best as possible? You'll get the answer in this video.
Hijo de tu madre.
Hello and welcome to a new video. When I say finally it's here, what do I even mean by that? Because if you've been on YouTube a bit, keeping your eyes open, then the algorithm has probably already figured out that you're into motorbikes and has shown you plenty of KTM 390 Enduro R content, reviews and test rides and the like. That's because over in India, where the bike is built, it's been available for a while now, and in North America too, a massive market for dual sport and enduro bikes. They already received the first press bikes some time ago, but here in Europe until now we hadn't had the chance. So we're seriously excited because we're actually the very first to get our hands on press models straight off the first container. And you can imagine, after all this waiting, not just from the hardcore enduro riders, but also from the motorcycle press, there's been huge anticipation, especially with all the question marks hanging in the air until just a few weeks ago. Now they're finally here. So just picture the queue of colleagues behind us, all waiting to get their hands on this thing. It's massive, which also means we haven't had loads of time for this first ride. Today's just about getting a first impression and placing the bike in context. But stay tuned, because in just a few weeks we'll be getting these models back, along with some of their closest rivals. For instance, the Suzuki DRZ 4S. We'll be doing comparisons, longer tours, proper travel tests. That's when it really gets exciting. But for today, let's just take a close look, and I do mean visually, at the KTM 390 Enduro R. And just looking at it, the bike has a really serious look about it. That minimalist headlight mask, still LED but very stripped down. The big high front mudguard, the long and narrow seat, visually long with its 32 millimeters. To me, that all screams serious enduro, but we also know at its core it's essentially the 390 Duke. So how much of that is actually still inside here? Right, at the heart of the bike is the same engine found in the current 390 Duke. This is the fourth generation of KTM's LC4C engine. That last C stands for compact. It's a 399cc single, putting out 45 horsepower at 8,500 RPM and 39 Newton meters of torque at 7,000 RPM. That engine is pretty much the only thing this bike shares with the Duke. Engine, intake system and exhaust, that's it. The frame, for example, is completely different. What we have here is a two-part steel trellis frame, a main trellis section with a bolted-on rear subframe. And that's actually quite noteworthy. There are far more expensive enduro and adventure bikes out there that only come with a fully welded frame. Here it's bolted on and specifically designed for off-road use. This same frame, by the way, is shared with the SMCR model. The bodywork, of course, is different, as is the ergonomics. The wheel sizes are proper enduro dimensions, 90-90-21 at the front and 140-80-18 at the rear. The stock tires are Metzeler Karoo 4, a solid 50-50 tire that performs well on tarmac and holds its own off-road too, as long as it's dry and not overly loose or deep. We've already had a lot of fun on it today, but more on that later. The suspension setup is different too. Up front, there's a WP 43mm open cartridge fork with 230mm of travel, adjustable for compression and rebound. At the rear, a directly linked WP shock with the same 230mm travel, adjustable for rebound and preload. Also worth noting, it's got a 6-speed gearbox, not something every bike in this class offers. And something I really like, a nicely done TFT display, developed specifically for the 390 Enduro R and also used on the 390 SMCR. It's compact and blends in discreetly, as it should on an enduro machine, much like a classic hard enduro LCD, but it's full color and and high res, so it still looks sharp. As for the basic stats, 9 liters of fuel capacity, 890 minute seat height. So that's the quick rundown. But what does that actually mean out on the road? I'll try to structure this video in a way that goes beyond what you'd read in a brochure. It's about the riding feel. And probably the thing most people are wondering is, how capable is this machine off-road really? I won't be answering that. Instead, my colleague Arlo will, since he's actually taken the bike out on a motocross track.
Yeah, I just had the pleasure of riding the 390 Enduro R on the motocross track, putting its off-road capabilities to the test. And yeah, KTM and off-road, that's a natural fit, and it shows with the 390. Now, to be honest, riders of smaller displacement bikes often don't get taken that seriously in biker banter circles. They tend to get brushed off a bit, seen as the kids' league. But the truth is, when it comes to off-road riding, you really don't need more than these 390cc. You've basically always got enough power. What's great too is that you don't have too much power. That's often the case with big capacity bikes. You hit an obstacle or a steep climb and you just end up slamming the throttle. And if you've got traction control on, the rear tire starts spinning wherever it wants and the power ends up everywhere except the ground. So you're not really getting the acceleration you need. The advantage with the 390 is that you can just give it full throttle. The rear wheel might spin, but the bike still drives forward quickly. And honestly, I'm pretty sure that compared to something like a 1390, 790 or any other big displacement bike, you're not much slower on the 390. As if anything, you might even be quicker. The big plus with smaller engines is that they usually mean less weight. And that gives you a huge advantage when it comes to handling, agility, and even overall ergonomics. You've got a narrow profile here, which really pays off when riding standing up. You don't have to splay your legs wide, and you're standing in a nicely compact position, just how you should on an off-road bike. So let's talk ergonomics. Most of the time, people will probably be sitting on the bike, and that's spot on ergonomically. You've got good knee grip. The bike wraps around you nicely when seated, and you feel very much a part of the machine. The handlebar position is great for sitting. You got an upright posture. Arms wide apart, so you've got excellent control, very comfortable and relaxed seating position. When standing, the bars feel a little low to me. I'd probably add bar risers. You do have the option of adjusting the bar position at the clamps. I'd try all 3 possible settings. Still, while standing, there's a decent range of movement depending on how you're positioned on the bike. You can shift around easily, and already here you can feel there aren't any sharp corners or weird edges on the left side or anything that would snag you while moving about. Really well sorted. I have to say though, the brakes are maybe a bit too sharp for off-road use. Of course, this is a dual sport bike, a hybrid, so it has to balance between on-road and off-road. On the road, it's great. You want aggressive, sporty, bitey brakes. But off-road, I had a few moments where I just wanted to slow down a bit with the rear brake, and it locked up too easily. The rear came around a few times, nothing catastrophic, but ideally I'd like something a little more forgiving. Speaking of hybrids, the tires fall into that category too. The Karoo 4 from Metzler is what's fitted here. It's a compromise between road and off-road. If I were only riding off-road, I'd definitely switch to full knobbly tires. We were out here on a pretty sandy, hard motocross track, and to be fair, for a hybrid tire, the Karoo 4 did an excellent job, but for pure off-road use, definitely swap to knobbly tires. Let's move on to the suspension. The overall setup leans more towards comfort, quite soft and forgiving. That works for about 90% of motocross track use. Over there, we had braking bumps. It soaked those up, no problem. You barely feel it through the bars. It's not like you're getting thrown about or losing grip through the whoops. It handles that really well. It also smooths out ruts and uneven ground superbly. Where it starts to reach its limits is when you're jumping. There were a few tables where I landed a bit flat and both front and rear suspension bottomed out. But you have to say, this bike isn't made for that kind of riding, and especially not the suspension. I tried turning the compression damping all the way in. That helped a bit, but not enough to stop it bottoming out entirely. But again, the bike isn't built for this. All in all, for off-road use, whether it's dirt tracks or forest trails, this is the perfect bike. I'd even say it's better suited than many of its bigger sisters or rival models. I'm just a big fan of small displacement bikes, especially for off-road riding.
So now you've heard a few off-road impressions. I'll share mine a bit later from a slightly less aggressive and less experienced perspective and more focused on relaxed off-road riding. Because even though the word enduro is in the name, KTM lists this bike under dual sport on their website. So it's not just made for blasting through the mud, it's meant to perform on both tarmac and loose terrain. Of course, like I said, there wasn't time today for a proper touring ride. That's still to come, but I did take it on the motorway first. And here's where it gets interesting. A major criticism of the competition, like the Suzuki DRZ, is that it only has 5 gears. Not ideal for long-distance riding, especially here in the German-speaking world where, let's be honest, you can't just go enduro riding around every corner. We often have to cover long distances to get to the next off-road paradise. So, does the 390 manage that? Yes. The 6-speed gearbox definitely helps, but let's get into the ride feel. Like Arlo said, this engine likes a few revs to get going. The power delivery is very linear though, which is great. What I noticed, however, is a bit of high-frequency vibration. And not just when you hold the throttle open at high revs and speeds, but also at lower RPMs. It's not so bad that I'd call it annoying or even a deal breaker. I think most riders won't pay much attention to it and will get used to it quickly. But if you've got sensitive hands and you're someone who's easily put off by vibrations, and I don't just mean those typical engine vibrations at a certain RPM, but a constant faint buzzing you feel through the pecs and the bars, well, that might stand out to you. Strangely, I noticed this buzzing most clearly at around 50 to 70 kilometers per hour. It actually faded as I went faster. And by 100 kilometers per hour, it was almost gone. At that speed, it was very comfortable to cruise along. With the gearing, which I'd say isn't overly long despite the 6 gears, you're cruising at around 5,500 to 5,700 RPM at 100 kilometers per hour. That's very pleasant for country roads. And when you really open it up on the motorway, you're doing around 130 kilometers per hour at about 7,500 to 7,750 RPM. The vibrations do come back a bit at that speed. I got a slight buzzing in my hands, a bit numb after a long motorway stint, and strangely, I'm using that word a lot today. The left foot peg vibrated more than the right. Don't ask me why. But even so, compared to the competition and considering the power output, I can definitely see myself doing longer motorway stretches on this bike. You've got loads of room to move around, even at higher speeds. The fastest I got it to was about 150 kilometers per hour. Not exactly mum-friendly, I know. But yeah, accelerating from motorway cruising speeds is totally doable with this power and gearing. The engine pulls well at the top end, so overtaking cars quickly is no problem. At higher speeds, you can tuck in nicely and it's surprisingly comfortable. Well, even with the off-road helmet I was wearing today, you can also slide back and forth along the long seat, which helps. As for fuel consumption, and I was riding fairly enthusiastically, we got 4.7 liters per 100 kilometers according to the display. That gives you a range of roughly 200 kilometers from the 9-liter tank. If you take it easier, which you probably will on an all-day tour, that figure should drop even further. We'll have real-world consumption tests in our upcoming touring videos. And when you hit a rough patch of motorway or any uneven road surface, I think the suspension works really well. It's genuinely comfortable. The long travel soaks up bumps nicely and the bike stays stable. A few times when accelerating out of corners uphill on country roads, I noticed the front end starting to wiggle just a bit, weight shifting back, throttle pinned, but it was very minor. Nothing dangerous. On the motorway itself, even in wind turbulence behind cars or lorries, it stayed totally planted. But let's be honest, motorway riding is a bit boring. It's just something you do because you have to. So what's it like when you finally take the exit and hit some proper country roads, maybe even a nice winding stretch? Well, in the twisties, I think KTM has done a solid job here too. The handling is typical of a bike with a big 21-inch front wheel. At low speeds it feels a bit wobbly, you're sitting up quite high on the bike, but you do have a wide handlebar to help keep everything under control. At higher speeds, that big rotating disc up front makes the bike a bit slower to turn and more sluggish, but I'd say it actually feels quite balanced. In fast S-bends, thanks to the long narrow seat and the wide bars, you've got loads of freedom to move around and can easily shift your weight from side to side with minimal effort. It responds well to your inputs. It's a smooth, flowing ride. Honestly, even on the road, it feels well sorted. We stiffened the front damping by 6 clicks because even on tarmac, especially when braking hard, the front end was diving a bit too much. And you probably heard already, it also bottomed out during some of the more aggressive riding on the motocross track. After that adjustment, I found the ride really smooth and clean. I weigh 75 kilograms, not exactly much, but even so, around Wiener Neustadt, where the roads aren't always perfect, I hit a few bumps mid-corner. The rear end absorbed those beautifully without any wobble or instability. It's a strong performance overall. The engine needs revs, and that's for sure, but it's fun. You just have to choose the right gear to keep it pulling. And this is where the electronics really help. The traction control on the road is nicely calibrated. It kicks in fairly early, but not in a way that's annoying. I'd say compared to the off-road traction control, it's a bit more sensitive, but I'd rather it stepped in too soon than too late. Especially with these 50/50 tires on tarmac. But it's subtle. You just feel the power being held back slightly without any jerking. And as soon as you stand the bike up again, the power comes right back in. The traction control handles it really smoothly, even on the road. And once you get into the rhythm, keeping the engine spinning above 5,000 or 6,000 RPM, where the real acceleration kicks in, it genuinely puts a smile on your face. You can feel the bike pulling, and that makes for an engaging ride. As for the brakes, you can tell they've been tuned with off-road in mind. The front isn't overly aggressive. It's a single 285mm disc up front from KTM's Indian suppliers, a Bibre, part of the Brembo group. 2-piston caliper. The feel at the lever is quite soft at first. You need to pull a bit before it really bites, but once it does, the response is nice and progressive. For this type of bike and its weight, I think it's totally fine. The rear brake, though, as Arlo already pointed out, is surprisingly sharp. It's still okay on the road, but even there, I'd prefer a bit more lever travel before lockup, something a little more progressive and refined. And off-road, it's even more noticeable, but I'll get to that in a bit. The last road focus, a component worth mentioning, is the Quickshifter. It's an optional feature and includes a blipper function for downshifts. I've got mixed feelings about it, to be honest. On the one hand, the gear changes are fast, both up and down, and KTM deserves praise for letting it work in all situations. You can downshift with the throttle open and upshift with it closed. It functions either way, that's great, but it's not always consistent. Sometimes the lightest tap of the lever is enough and the next gear pops in instantly. Other times you really have to be firm. The feel through the shifter varies quite a bit. Sometimes it's a bit notchy, not super precise, but I'm being picky here. At the end of the day, it always worked when I needed it to. So, just a quick word from me on how I rate it for off-road use. First off, electronics. The bike comes with both street and off-road ride modes. And what I really like, when you turn the ignition off and back on, the off-road mode stays activated. Personally, I find that really convenient. Maybe it's not the safest solution, depending on how you look at it, but you decide. In off-road mode, the rear ABS is automatically deactivated. You can also set the traction control to off-road or switch it off completely. And KTM's off-road traction control works just as well as always. They've nailed this system. It allows a bit of wheel slip, so the rear can step out now and then. It'll spin up a little. But before things get out of hand, it reins it back in. It's kind of a Jesus take the wheel setup. And I like that, especially if you're riding a bit more relaxed and just want to enjoy the scenery without constantly being on edge. That said, because of the engine's linear nature, which I already mentioned, it's not particularly tricky to modulate power, even with traction control switched off and even if you're not super experienced. It's fun, but you do need to be in the right gear. Unlike some other single cylinders or torque-heavy engines where you can just cruise at half throttle and then crack it open to get the rear sliding, this engine needs proper throttle input and higher revs to make that happen. But when you do wind it on properly, then yeah, you can definitely have some fun with it. And because of that smooth character, you're not going to accidentally send the rear end flying out. It's a different story when it comes to braking zones. Here's where I ran into trouble with the rear brake. The front is beautifully tuned. Sure, it might take a bit more pressure to slow down with one finger, but it's still manageable. The rear though, I find it too aggressive. Most of my sketchy moments off-road came from going downhill on loose terrain and the rear locking up too quickly. Especially with slightly chunkier boots, it's really hard to modulate that brake. The difference between just slowing down and locking up is tiny, and I think that could definitely be improved. Now, let's get into ergonomics. Arlo mentioned that for him, the handlebar felt a bit low, and if I remember right, he found it slightly off. For me though, it actually fits this type of bike really well. I'm 1,85 m and I found the riding position nicely active. That means if I'm on a trickier trail, I can really let the bike move underneath me. There's plenty of space to shift about. And for example, unlike the 96 Enduro R sister model, the tank isn't mounted far back into the subframe. That didn't bother me at all. There's loads of room up front. At the same time, the tank isn't so low or far back that I'd struggle with longer, relaxed stints in a standing position. So overall, the ergonomics felt just right for me, active and appropriate for this kind of bike. As for the suspension, for my level of riding skill and the terrain I covered, the suspension had more than enough reserve. Its responsiveness didn't get in the way of my riding enjoyment at all. Actually, it was spot on. Well, Almost. There is one small thing that bugs me, ride-by-wire throttle response at very low speeds. It's not just this bike and it's not just KTM, but when you are stationary or crawling slowly, there's a delay between twisting the throttle and the revs rising. And that caused a few annoying moments for me. I guess it's just muscle memory, but a few times I rolled on the throttle and let out the clutch expecting the revs to rise immediately, and they didn't. So the bike stalled, usually during U-turns or slow maneuvers on loose gravel. The clutch itself is nicely controllable, but the slight lag from the throttle just caught me out. No big deal, but it is a bit irritating. Once you're rolling and the revs are up a bit, the response becomes quick and direct. No complaints there. But at very low speeds, that initial lag is definitely noticeable. I'm sure we've got a clip of it in the video.
See it?
And with that, I think I've more or less covered all the areas of use. So let's return to the original question. Is this an enduro, an adventure bike, or a naked bike that's been converted for off-road? There's been a lot of debate even under the initial reveal video. And here's what we found. We weighed the bike using our 1000 PS scale. Fully fueled, it came in at 167 kilograms. That's pretty much spot on with what KTM states. Their spec sheet lists 165 kilograms fully fueled, and the registration documents show 166 kilograms. Now, considering this bike puts out 45 horsepower and with a look back at existing and still popular dual sport models, that is a fair bit of weight, but that's mainly down to the A2 license rule. The bike is allowed a maximum power to weight ratio of 0.2 kilowatts per kilogram. If it weighed less, KTM would have had to reduce power. Sure, people have often asked, why don't the manufacturers just forget about this A2 nonsense and offer a version with a restrictor kit? So you'd have, say, 30 horsepower for A2 riders and everyone else could enjoy a lighter bike with full power, maybe weighing around 130 kilograms. Well, we did ask KTM about that. Their answer was pretty simple. Building lightweight bikes is expensive. Using thinner materials, developing new parts, it all drives up R&D costs. And the result would be a bike that almost certainly couldn't be sold at an attractive price point anymore. At the moment, the 390 Enduro R costs £5,699 in the UK and $5,499 in the US. That's quite a statement, especially when you compare it to the competition. Suzuki, for example, caught some flack for charging that much for a 40 horsepower bike. Of course, when you take a closer look at this KTM, you can see where costs have been saved. I'm thinking of the oddly mounted engine bash plate, which feels a bit flimsy, or technical solutions that I personally don't love, like the fact that you have to remove a side panel to adjust preload on the rear shock. The air filter, by the way, is also behind that panel, though in this case I think it's acceptable. You've got to undo, I believe, 8 bolts. Could it be faster? Sure, but it's all right. We also checked out the onboard toolkit, so yes, a bit of adventure readiness has definitely been considered. And overall, I'd say it's a very versatile and well-rounded package for the £5,000 to £6,000 or dollars range. But to be clear, it's not a hard enduro, so no, I wouldn't call it a pure enduro, but it's not a naked bike either. Yes, the engine doesn't feel particularly enduro-like, and I say that as someone who rides a Tenere privately, so I'm used to that sort of talky, tractor-like character, and this engine doesn't deliver that. If you're someone who wants to ride around at half throttle and always have power on tap, then this probably isn't the right bike for you. But for everyone else, if you're happy to rev it out and you enjoy that kind of riding, then it really does work. And everything else, the ergonomics, the suspension, the wheel sizes, all of that felt completely right for me today for what this bike is meant to be. A dual sport machine. So in my view, it's neither naked bike nor enduro. It really is something in between. And if you accept that and keep it in mind, I think you'll come away impressed by the range it covers within the motorcycle spectrum. Now, you've now heard plenty of different takes on the KTM 390 Enduro R. So what do you think of it? Is it an enduro, a naked bike, an adventure bike, or a proper dual sport machine? It could be all of those. Let us know what you think in the comments. And don't forget that if you want daily motorcycle content, hit that subscribe button. And if you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. Thanks for watching. See you soon. Take care and bye for now.